Although today he's known as a prolific anime director, the now retired Koichi Mashimo didn't exactly chart a straightforward path into the industry. Instead, he started his creative career just fooling around with the camera, filming commercials and writing scripts during his college years. His experience in photography didn't translate cleanly into anime production. By his own admission, when he joined Tatsunoko Production in either 1974 or 75, the learning curve was steep. Why exactly he decided to get into anime production, he's never said, at least nowhere I can find. But if I had to speculate, I'd say he probably had an appreciation for animation from a young age. At an Anime Expo panel talk in 2002, he confessed that his favorite anime was Tom and Jerry, which I take to mean A, he probably got into it as a kid, and B, he's a real one. So he keeps on with the job, nabbing some directorial credit along the way, but then he made the mistake that all moderately comfortable middle-class working folk make. He decided to go skiing, and, as you might have guessed, got into an accident. Just like me. No, that isn't a joke. He was much worse off than I was, but I still crashed and collapsed and had to be strapped to a sled and hauled down the mountain by emergency rescuers. By the time I was inside, my internal body temperature had dropped so far that I've actually blocked the number from my memory. I'm serious. Don't go skiing. It's bad. I can't go back in time and warn him, but I can warn you. Don't ski. Look at this person vertically skiing! Are you trying to die? Anyway, his accident resulted in an extended hospital stay, during which time he gained a new philosophy, a new lease on life. After hearing one doctor talk about his treatment philosophy, one which prioritized helping patients and passing on medical knowledge to the next generation, he dreamed of helping an anime production studio with a similar philosophy, one which prioritized caring for its animators, incubating their skills, instead of chasing profits. Quote, "If all a hospital ever cared about was making money, it'd be terrible, wouldn't it?" Yeah, that would be pretty terrible, wouldn't it? So that was his goal. Run an anime studio that wasn't about the money, but about nurturing talent. In his words, he wanted a hospital-style studio. A decade later, he made that dream a reality when, with the help of production IG boss Mitsuhisa Ishikawa, he founded the anime production studio B-Train. Active from 1999 to 2011, B-Train worked on a steady stream of productions, and their work on shows such as the anime adaptation of Tsubasa Chronicle and just way too much .hack put them on the map as a reliable, if stylistically divisive, production studio. Mashimo's leadership fostered all sorts of young talent with wild ideas, maybe some of which should have been left on the cutting room floor, and thanks to that, the staff nurtured at B-Train would go on to helm prolific careers of their own. For instance, the infamous Gen Urobuchi got his second ever anime production credit working at B-Train. After helming some OVAs throughout the 90s, director Itsuro Kawasaki got to helm his first television productions at B-Train, before going on to direct a whole lot more elsewhere, notably Sengoku Basara and The Legend of Legendary Heroes, which is, and this is true, the real title of an actual show. And then there's this one composer who, we'll circle back to her. So that's all fine and dandy, Mashimo and B-Train nurturing talent and all, and while that's probably what's most important about them, without said nurturing, the modern anime landscape might look a lot different than it is today, it's not what they're most well known for. Of B-Train's prolific output, 3 shows in particular stand out. A loose trilogy of thematically aligned television anime that have managed to stick in memory, even as their other productions fade in time. Today, B-Train is best remembered for... Oh, what am I doing with all this buildup? You read the title, it's Girls with Guns, baby! The television anime Noir, which aired in 2001, Madlax from 2004, and El Cazador de la Bruja, 2007, collectively make up B-Train's Girls with Guns trilogy. Though they have nothing to do with each other plot-wise, they're all strung together by the unifying thread of, women with firearms. I don't want to just keep saying Girls with Guns over and over. While not initially conceived of as a trilogy, by the time Madlax wrapped, Mashimo already had in mind an idea for a third show that would retroactively make it such, with a unifying theme that would make the 3 seem a more cohesive whole. Ordinary girls coming of age in less than ordinary circumstances. With him at the director's helm of all 3, what we're left with is a loose trilogy of shows united not by plot, but by themes. How well did each of these shows do at capturing said themes? And just in general, what was it people liked about them so much that they're still remembered today? Let's dive into each and see what this trilogy has to offer. One day, the assassin Miriel receives a request from another assassin, Kirika, who woke up with no memories of who she is. All she knows is that she's good at killing, and she wants to learn who she is, and wants Miriel's help on that quest. Normally, Miriel might turn down such a request, but Kirika's got one item in her possession that sparks her interest: a pocket watch with a unique chime. One that used to belong to her father, one she last saw the day her family was killed. She thus realizes that helping Kirika uncover her own past also might help her uncover the truth about why her parents were killed. Somehow, some way, she and Kirika are connected, and she has to know how. So, she agrees, on one condition. Miriel works alone, so once this job is done, to protect herself, she'll have to put Kirika down. Looking relieved, Kirika agrees, and so, the two partner up, and the rest of the show follows them as they go about their lives as the assassin duo Noir, slowly uncovering the truth about Kirika's past and Miriel's family, and the ancient secret tying them together. Noir, like the other two shows, was headed by director Koichi Mashimo and producer Shigeru Kitayama, though according to Mashimo the whole girls with guns thing came from Kitayama, so we can saddle him with all the credit or blame where appropriate. Hyperbole, of course. These creative efforts are all collaborative, and for Noir in particular, they worked with screenwriter Ryoei Tsukimura. Kitayama previously worked as a producer on Trigun, and Tsukimura had previously worked on scripts for 6 episodes of Revolutionary Girl Utena, and together their creativity produced a slow burn, a contemplative show just as much about its ideas as it was about the cool action. Throughout its 26 episodes beyond Mashimo's stated intent of coming of age, Noir explores ideas of self-discovery and found family. And in order to get into those, we're going to have to dig into the show itself.
Noir. It is the name of an ancient fate. 2 maidens who govern death. The peace of the newly born. Their black hands protect.
One of the themes at the center of Noir is identity, a theme that permeates the show's prevailing mystery. Just who is Kirika, and what's her connection with Miriel? The whole initial thrust behind the overarching narrative is finding out just who she is. Kirika wakes up with no memory of who she is, just an assumed identity as seen on her student ID card, and immediately hires Miriel to help uncover her real identity. And Miriel takes on the job only because Kirika's in possession of that watch from her childhood, a family heirloom she last saw the day her parents were killed. That itself is a lead. There's some connection between the two of them, to be uncovered later. But the mystery of exactly who Kirika is and her connection to Miriel unravels slowly. Until then, the process of learning just who Kirika is becomes, by and large, a subtle, understated one. It's a journey of self-discovery. We learn who Kirika is as she lives and learns about her present self. Lacking any answers to the mysteries, at first, we're reliant on her actions to judge who she is. In other words, all we have to go on is who she shows herself to be. A competent assassin, yes, but also a quiet young woman who displays a surprising penchant for empathy and selflessness. From the first 2 episodes, she wonders why she doesn't feel sad for the people she kills, but even as she wonders that, she quietly cries, showing that some part of her does in fact care.
I make a living killing people. Why doesn't that sadden me?
Later, in episode 7, when she inadvertently puts both herself and Miriel in danger, she pleads for Miriel to shoot her and leave her behind, showing an inherent selflessness in placing her partner's safety over her own life. Her most notable display of empathy, however, occurs in episode 6, where her target serves as a bit of a thematic parallel. Said target is a retired war criminal who executed a whole lot of innocent people back in the day, and the survivors and their families want justice. But now, the war criminal's just an old man who's a bit of a local hero, not because of his actions in the war, but because he's a genuine pillar of the community. He cares for a cat named for a character from Russian literature, a character meant to be a pure and innocent soul. And when he falls ill, the entire town shows up to care for him. Kirika sees the good man this monster has become and is torn. On the one hand, she has a job to do, and this man deserves what's coming to him. On the other hand, what good could come by harming someone who can't defend himself? Someone who now lives his life solely for the benefit of others. Throughout the episode, she has a few conversations with the guy and can't help but see him as a kindly fellow.
The prince is saying that he will miss you.
So, she must wonder, can one ever do enough good to wash the blood from their hands? Or will they forever be defined by that blood they spilt? These are questions that Kiriko will always wrestle with, and while she does ultimately go through with the job, she can't do it without a lingering taste of regret. In the old man she saw herself, someone who did a lot of evil and still found a way to better themselves, to craft a new identity, to be more than just a killer. In the end, his past caught up with him. Is Kiriko even capable of moving on as he did? And what past is waiting to catch up with her? One thing's for sure, she doesn't want to wait for that past to catch up with her. She'd rather find it herself. That drive to learn about herself never leaves her. Throughout the show, it's her single greatest obsession. Just take a look at episode 7. Here, Muriel and Kiriko are heading for extraction after Kiriko got shot on the job, but while Muriel's most concerned with their safety, Kiriko's mostly torn up about having dropped her ID card back at the enemy compound.
But I couldn't throw it away, even though I knew it wasn't real. Even if it is a lie, it was in my hands. It belonged to me.
This shows that her biggest need is to know herself, to have an identity, to belong, and that need is so strong it overrides common sense. She will, if unintentionally, put herself and the people she cares about in danger if it means feeling a sense of self. And who is that self she wants to be? We get glimpses of that in episodes 4 and 13. In the former, Kiriko spends no small amount of time observing the daughter of that episode's target. With the way her gaze lingers on a photo of the girl being happy, she says without words that she wishes for that sort of familial connection. And in the end, she's filled with a quiet guilt that she was the one who ultimately shattered it, as shown by her being unable to say so much as a single word to the girl when they run into each other on the street. 13 sees her take up a hobby, painting, and strike up a friendship with a fellow painter who's nothing but supportive in encouraging her to pursue her interests. When the painter dies in her arms, caught up in the crossfire of the episode's B-plot, her grief-stricken expression says it all. Despite how little emotion she usually shows and how quiet she is, she genuinely does care for other people. Episodes like these illustrate the kind of person Kiriko aspires to be outside of the assassin she is. Someone with family and friends, someone who can spend a quiet afternoon with those she cares about in comfort, someone who pursues peaceful hobbies and enjoys a nice afternoon tea. So there we have clear illustrations of who she is and wants to be, but what about who she was and who will she choose to be? The answers to those questions only come toward the end. Turns out she's so good at killing people because she's been groomed since she was a little kid by the secret evil organization behind all the bad stuff, the Soldats, to be an unrivaled assassin. The woman who groomed her, Altina, did all of that for her own ends, the specifics of which aren't relevant here. What's important is how she does it. She acts as a sort of surrogate mother figure, using flowery, affectionate language to manipulate Kiriko into acting as she desires.
You have done well to come home.
So here we see that who Kiriko was, and indeed part of who she is now, and who she's being pushed into being, was an identity created by an external force, manipulated into existence for the purpose of fulfilling that force's own ambitions. Taking all of that together then, Kiriko's search for her own identity leaves her torn between two paths. The Kiriko who was, the girl groomed from childhood to be a cold-blooded killer, and the Kiriko who is, an empathetic, reliable partner who values peace and painting and family. And in the end, the choice of identity of who to be is hers. Kiriko casts her surrogate mother into the pit of Mount Doom and holds tight onto Muriel, the one person who's constantly been there for her as she's learned about and grown into herself. In so doing, choosing a brighter future, a brighter self, instead of falling into an easy pit of cold despair. Ultimately, regarding the question of identity, reality, Kirika's journey shows that what matters most isn't who you were or who others say you are, it's who you choose to be. Kirika's choice at the end there isn't just about identity, though. It also plays into Noir's other big theme of family. The choice of the family you were born into versus the family you find. Through this theme, Noir posits that what makes family isn't blood, but action. It's not just about who's there for you, but why they're there for you. And that theme is best illustrated by the tragedy of Chloe and the choices of Miriel. Chloe, like Kirika, was groomed from childhood to be a killer by Altena. Unlike Kirika, though, Chloe is stuck with Altena for her whole life. It's implied that she rarely, if ever, is allowed to leave Altena's side until she starts getting assigned missions. And so, because she's always with Altena, she's absolutely inundated with the priestess's manipulative rhetoric. The woman always whispering loving and encouraging words in her ear.
My darling Chloe. My precious Chloe. My darling Chloe.
Thanks to this, Altena's loving facade, and the sheer amount of time Chloe spends with her, Chloe is utterly loyal. Altena is her family, and nothing in the world can change that. But of course, just like with Kirika, all of Altena's loving words to Chloe are pure manipulation. She doesn't care about Chloe, not really. She cares about how she can use Chloe to bring about her own goals. Winning Chloe's love is simply the most effective way she knows to go about that. We know she doesn't really care about Chloe because when she's brought the news of her death, she's totally unfazed. She has contingency plans after all. And yes, it was Chloe's unyielding loyalty to Altena that got her killed. In the penultimate episode, after Miriel snaps Kirika out of Altena's manipulation, Kirika begs Chloe to stop. Throughout the show, they've formed a bond. Chloe's idolized Kirika since childhood, loves her, and while the reserved Kirika is less emotionally available, she nonetheless demonstrates her attachment to Chloe by begging with the girl to stop the fighting, going so far as to drop her weapon just to show that she wants them all to live peacefully together. But thanks to Altena, Chloe's too far gone. She goes to kill Miriel out of misguided love, jealousy, hatred, a need to keep Kirika for herself, and left with no choice, Kirika has to jump in and kill Chloe first. In other words, Chloe being manipulated into staying with the family she's had since birth is what gets her killed. Kirika, originally part of that same family, chooses a new family, the one she made with Miriel, and that choice to stay with her found family is what ultimately saves her life. The tragedy of Chloe, the victim of her blood family, illustrates that someone simply being there for you doesn't make them family. What makes them family, as shown by what Kirika sacrifices to save Miriel's life, is that they'll put everything on the line for you without a second's hesitation. This choice Kirika makes, twice actually, to sacrifice old family in favor of new is echoed by Miriel in two ways. Once very literally earlier in the season, and once toward the end. Episode 14 sees her favorite uncle Claude come back into the picture. At first, she's over the moon. He's the one survivor from the massacre that robbed her family from her, and it's from him that she learned her trade. The familial love they share is indisputable, and they even start planning a vacation together to a favorite old haunt. Just the two of them. A lakeside retreat that symbolizes a happier, more innocent time. But times are no longer innocent, and Claude didn't return for her. He's now part of the Soldats, the same organization that manipulated Kirika and Chloe from birth and had Miriel's family killed. And now he's been tasked with taking out Kirika. He asks Miriel to bring Kirika to him quietly so they can take care of it nice and easy, appealing to their familial bond to try to get her to do what he wants, what he believes is best for their family. But of course, Miriel can't make herself do that. Their bond has been growing steadily stronger throughout the show, and even in this very episode, Kirika's been nothing but supportive. She shows genuine happiness at Miriel being reunited with her uncle, giving soft smiles, an expression which, for her emotionally distant self, is rare, and all the more meaningful for its rarity. So, instead of handing over Kirika, Miriel instead has to shoot Claude. She chooses her found family over her blood. She chooses the family that would never ask her to make such a choice. Kirika would no doubt have let herself be handed over if Miriel had decided that, but she was never going to. She trusts the family that trusts her to make that choice more than the family that forces her to make it. The most meaningful choice of family she makes, though, comes toward the end, when the truths about Kirika are finally revealed. The fact that she was groomed to be an assassin isn't the shock here. If anything, that's to be expected. What isn't is her first assignment. As just a little kid, the first time Kirika was sent out on a job, it was to kill Muriel's family. The Soldats ordered it, yes, it was going to happen one way or the other, but Kirika was still the one who pulled the trigger. The revelation devastates both of them. Muriel's gut reaction is to abandon Kirika, to break the promise that has bound them since their first meeting. This sends Kirika into a spiral that leads her to falling into Altana's arms, and even Muriel herself can't quite understand how she's feeling, why she let Kirika go instead of killing her. She needs to spend a couple of episodes alone before she gets it. Not only is Kirika not to blame thanks to the grooming and whatnot, but throughout the show, with every episode, she's shown herself to be a more and more trustworthy partner, someone without whom she is demonstrably worse off. In episode 23, Muriel finds a letter Kirika wrote in case she didn't get to say goodbye. The letter talks about how happy she was during their time together, how much joy she felt being partners with Muriel.
When I learned that Noir was originally a name for two, my heart was filled with joy because I found you. I was so happy that I wanted to sing, "Oh my dear Muriel," but I just can't express how I feel in writing.
It's basically a love letter, and reading it makes Muriel break down in tears. With that sight alone, you don't need her to say anything to realize she feels the same way. So, in spite of what Kirika did, she sets off to find her. In other words, although Kirika took from Muriel her family, Muriel chooses to be with her anyway. Found family over blood. Between all of that, Muriel choosing Kirika over her blood, and Kirika choosing Muriel over Chloe and Altana, Noir demonstrates that the most important family isn't the one you're born into or raised in. A real family is one that'll put everything on the line for you. That's the family you want to choose every time. And taken together, those two themes, identity and family, synthesize into a broader argument about the choices we make and what those choices reveal about ourselves. Throughout the series, Muriel and Kirika consistently make choices that prioritize each other over others, choices to be empathetic when it would be easier to detach. Your choices reveal who you are. Muriel and Kirika, assassins though they may be, make choices that reveal a kindness hidden by their violent exterior. No matter how rough, dirty, or mean you are, there is always room to choose kindness. Even if your world is dark, you can always choose to seek the light. Just as Muriel herself says at the very end of the show in refutation to one of the Soldats' leaders,
"In the end, all of the world we live in lies in darkness.
Which is why we continue to seek the light."
Wait a minute, is this shit fucking Kingdom Hearts?
Kingdom Hearts is light!
Being B-Train's first original production, after working on a handful of adaptations, one might not expect Noir to be all that remarkable a work from a production standpoint. But, as a matter of fact, aside from a few notable stumbles here and there, it is actually a well-produced show that takes advantage of its medium to engage in some clever visual storytelling. There's the obvious fight scenes, of course, which are dope, but there's also strong scene direction and some nice, if obvious, symbolism that keep the show engaging on not just a narrative, but visual level. Let's take those one at a time. First, the action scenes. These are the bits that are the most obviously cool at first glance. The animation on display is often pure fire, and the action set pieces are often constructed to follow the rule of cool to the nth degree, such that the only thing you can say upon seeing some of this shit is fuck yeah. Like, how about this one scene where Kirika lures some goons up a spiral staircase and then pulls this. What can I say but, dude, sick. But these action scenes do go deeper than that, often serving as an avenue through which the show characterizes its two leads without a single line of dialogue. So think about your average shonen anime. You know, those action romps where characters have to call out their special moves, where in the middle of the action we have to cut to characters standing on the sidelines, or even the internal monologues of the fighters themselves who explain in laborious detail what's going on. In other words, shows where people just will not shut the fuck fuck up. This approach can be functional, and a lot of these shows are great, but it's not the most effective use of the medium. Why use words to explain what's happening when you can just show things happening? Noir understands this perfectly, and it rules. Take the action in episode 3. Early on, there's this little bit where some goons are running down a hallway. Kirika's got her head pressed against the door. The camera zooms in on her ear as the footsteps get louder. Then, eyes closed, Kirika pulls back, and just like that, through visuals and Foley alone, the show has demonstrated that Kirika's got really good hearing, which she can use to her advantage. But wait, that's not all. Later on in the same episode, she and Miriel find themselves in a casino. Miriel jokingly offers a drink and popcorn just as the baddies cut the power, plunging them into darkness. To Miriel's surprise, Kirika says she would actually like some popcorn. A bit odd given the dire situation, wouldn't you think? These guys are hunting them down with night vision goggles while they're trapped in the dark. What use have they for snacks? Oh my god, it was set up! The hallway scene established Kirika's ability to use her heightened sense of hearing to shoot targets she can't see, so that when a much more dangerous situation arose, wherein they couldn't rely on her sight, we had a precedent for her using that ability in a new, unexpected, yet perfectly logical manner. Fuck! It's so cool! It's clever visual storytelling with clear setup and payoff, and it also shows how Noir is able to take advantage of its medium to show us information about these characters. You didn't need anyone narrating in your ear to explain that, Masaka, that young assassin Kirika has a heightened sense of hearing and she can use that hearing to shoot targets she can't see. No! All of that information was shown purely with visuals and sound design, as can only be done in an audio-visual medium like anime. Noir knows it's an anime and takes full advantage of that, and it fucking rules. The action isn't the only way Noir takes advantage of its medium. It knows how to craft a dialogue exchange without a single spoken word. Think of it, people don't just communicate with words, they communicate through body language, facial expressions. Pulling that off in a format of limited animation is tricky. Indeed, this is a medium with a frequent over-reliance on dialogue, spoken or narrated, to communicate plot or character beats. But it can be done, and on occasion, Noir excels at telling its story without words, with just visuals alone. It can show us how characters are feeling, carry out an entire dialogue with just a few looks. Take this brief exchange from the end of episode 5. Miriel's just disarmed this one goon and has him at gunpoint. He's taunting her all like, you can't kill me, I've got information you need.
Shoot me and your key is gone.
But she's pissed at him for killing a friend and his family, and so, figuring she can get whatever intel he has elsewhere, calls his bluff and executes him. Then she turns and finds Kirika standing there, watching. Kirika, usually stoic, lets out a faint gasp, and God, there's so much you can read into just that. Kirika knows and accepts that they're both good at what they do, but she's never taken pleasure in it, and she's looked to Miriel as a sort of guiding light. But now her compass has just executed a defenseless man. Now she's taken aback and has to reevaluate both Miriel and her own relationship with her. Miriel, in turn, seeing that faint shock on Kirika's face, tries to maintain the hardened expression before averting her gaze. Don't judge me, he deserved it, she wants to say, but guilt overcomes her, and she can't bring herself to admit she was wrong. Even if he did have it coming, he was defenseless, and he could have been useful. What sort of example is she setting for Kirika? How good of a partner can she really be if she lets herself lose control like that? Kirika manages, without uttering a word, perhaps without even meaning to, admonish Miriel, and lets her sit in those feelings before quietly walking away. So there we see how Noir is able to carry out whole dialogues without literal dialogue. The show can take its characters on whole emotional arcs through facial expressions alone, as seen by a faint gasp communicating shock, confusion, and contemplation, and an averted gaze reflecting hardened shame. You may have noticed from how much I'm repeating footage here, the animation can at times be very limited. But I think that just speaks to the strength of the show's writing and directing, that it can take full advantage of what limited animation it's able to provide to communicate so much information. There's this concept in writing called economy of expression, where strong writing is characterized by its ability to communicate the maximum maximum amount of information with as few words as possible. While you could never accuse me of being terribly concise, I would like to posit that this show, at its best, very much is, and that's part of what makes it so compelling. It knows how to make maximum use of its words and images to communicate the necessary information. And so, even when the show scales back on its dialogue and visuals, holding on a quiet shot, it never feels slow because it's always communicating something important. Some significant plot or character beat is always happening, even or especially in its quietest moments. Noir doesn't need an excess of dialogue or exposition to tell its story. All it needs is a glance. There's generally strong shot composition and pretty background art throughout the show as well, so Noir is always easy on the eyes. Probably the best example of the show still looking pretty outside of the action scenes is in the very first episode. This shot, right here, of Kirika sitting alone against the sunset as she looks at the watch. I mean, do I need to say anything? The background art of the sun itself is gorgeous, and the composition of the shot itself, with Kirika small, dead center against that setting sun, perfectly symbolizes her loneliness. She's alone in the frame, and the sun itself is in a state where it's dimming, soon to be gone from sight as it sinks into the night. Right now, the only thing meaningful in Kirika's life is that watch, and so it absorbs her full attention. That watch is also a symbol that carries through the whole show. At the start, it's one of the few clear memories Muriel has of the night her parents were killed, as that watch was originally her father's. How then did Kirika end up possessing it? That mystery won't be resolved until the truth about Kirika's presence that fateful day is revealed, but until then, it and the chime it plays serve a couple of functions. As a tether between them, a reminder of their as of yet unknown connection, and as a symbol of longing, of clinging to a past long since gone. When Muriel stares at it, she can't help but remember and yearn for what she's lost. When Kirika stares at it, she can't help but ache for the self she can no longer remember. It's quite notable then that the moment this watch breaks is the same moment where they finally move past those hang-ups and fully commit to each other in their present selves. During their fight in episode 25, where Kirika is still under Altana's spell, Muriel tosses the watch into the air as a distraction, and just as they have each other dead to rights, it hits the ground and shatters, playing its chime one last time. Upon hearing that, Kirika breaks with the memories it triggers. The shattering of that watch is a silent plea for Muriel. She no longer cares what Kirika did, she just wants her back. The haunted look on Kirika's face has guilt written all over it, and her dropping her gun as a result shows she's finally ready to accept what she did, no matter what Muriel chooses. The watch was of the past. By discarding it, they're able to finally come together again. In other words, they let the past die. They killed it. Kylo Ren would be proud! Unfortunately, while the show is clever in many aspects of its presentation, there is one aspect in which it is very much not. Its over-reliance on recycled footage. Far too often, the show will start playing footage that has already played before for tens of seconds at a time, sometimes even over a minute. This is a problem that starts in the very first episode. Remember that shot of Kirika against the sunset? It's a shot so nice they had to show it twice, along with much of the rest of the accompanying scene. It plays at both the 6.5-minute mark and the 19-minute mark, and the recurrence lasts just about 45 seconds. 45 repeated seconds within the same episode, the very first episode! And this is something that happens again and again throughout the show. Why this happened, I don't know. Maybe some production issues resulting in a need to fill time where they couldn't get original animation done. Whatever the case, whenever it crops up, which is often, it has the effect of harming the pacing, dragging down otherwise great scenes. It's a real shame, a distracting blemish on an otherwise excellent series. But notably, it's also the only blemish. If you're able to look past it, then what you're left with is an enthralling, moody action thriller, rich in theme and character, an experience that you absolutely owe it to yourself to seek out and enjoy at least once in your life. With its very first original outing, B-Train knocked it out of the park. Can they keep up this momentum? Let's find out. Before we get into Madlax, I want you to know that the very first note I took about the show when first watching it a few years ago was, quote, absolute nonsense. So that's the baseline we're working from here. And considering that by Mashimo's own admission, the creative process behind this show involved lots and lots of alcohol, I don't think that's an unfair assessment on my part. The narrative in Madlax is a bit broader in scope. It's divided between two primary viewpoint characters. One is the titular Madlax, living in the war-torn country of Guise, where she makes her living as a mercenary. The other is Margaret, a somewhat empty-headed high schooler living a peaceful life in Nefris. Although they don't know each other and seem to be living polar opposite lives, there's some ambiguous connection between the two. And as the war escalates, aspects of their separate lives start bleeding into one another. What's the truth behind their connection, and indeed, the war itself? The slow unraveling of those mysteries and more is what Madlax is all about. Once again, we've got Mashimo directing and Kitayama producing, this time joined by writer Yosuke Kuroda, who at the time had done work writing for Trigun under Kitayama, and would go on to work on the notorious High School of the Dead, something that's basically porn, My Hero Academia, and my favorite personal of his, Birdie Wing, which is, and this is true, the only show on the planet that has ever made golf look cool. But also, that show never made the main ship canon despite such insane teasing that the subtext was a hair's breadth away from just being text, a crime for which I will never forgive him, the coward! An eclectic collection of writing credits, to be sure, but if nothing else, the man has shown his chops in terms of crafting a compelling narrative. Pair that with Mashimo and Kitayama's eccentricities and lots of alcohol, and what's the result? A show that is, frankly, insane. Let's take a deeper look. Madlax is, in part, a story about war. A civil war in a fictitious country, Guise, serves as the backdrop for most of the big plot stuff, and for a lot of smaller episodic beats in the first half of the show. One question the show poses is how war changes people. Vanessa, for instance, starts as an average, competent businesswoman. Her first taste of war deeply disturbs her, as she can't understand how Madlax can so easily go around killing people. She would love to go back home if she could, but due to plot reasons, she's stuck in the war-torn Guise in constant danger. So, in response to that danger, driven by her goal of unveiling the truth of the war to the world, and perhaps inspired by or desiring to help protect her new friend Madlax, Vanessa hardens. She starts getting in some target practice, becomes a decent shot. When eventually they're surrounded by enemy soldiers, Vanessa doesn't hesitate to shoot a guy to save Madlax.
I shot him.
You didn't kill him. The man you shot isn't dead.
That's not the point. I attempted to kill someone, and that is unforgivable.
Vanessa, the normal businesswoman, becomes a hardened survivor, and eventually, victim of war. She's someone who, under normal circumstances, would never have picked up a gun, but war demanded she change, and so she did. It's from Vanessa's perspective that we're also invited to speculate how war shapes people who are born into it. She wonders, with no shortage of sorrow, at how unfazed Madlax, herself barely or not even yet an adult, is about all this horrible, bloodthirsty business. After shooting that one soldier to save Madlax, Vanessa is traumatized, as a normal person should be, screaming that she just wants it all to stop.
Make it stop! Make it stop!
How can Madlax live like this, she wonders. How can she so easily take so many lives and not bat an eye? Simply put, it's all she's ever known. For her, war is normal. That's what growing up with war does. It forces you to view violence as commonplace. If you were living through war with Vanessa's mindset, that of a normal, non-violent person, it would mentally break you real fast. The only way to cope is to accept ongoing violence as the state of things. War makes violence normal. War makes the innocent complicit in its sins. They had no choice in the matter. They had to do what they could to survive. But, of course, war is not normal. It is not natural. It is not the default state of things. It is always, exclusively, something manufactured by humans. And it doesn't have to be. It never has to be. The show makes this assertion in its revelation that the big bad evil organization behind everything is, in fact, behind everything, supplying weapons and intel to both sides of the war, ensuring that the conflict remains ongoing. They're even the ones that started it, harnessing the power of the show's MacGuffins, the magic books, to exponentially exacerbate existing tensions, thus leading to the present conflict. The show's big bad, the Phantom of the Opera over here, calls it a false war. But are not all wars false? Are not all wars driven by some ugly human desire? Again, there is no such thing as a natural war, as war itself is not a natural state. It is always manufactured by humans. Ugly human qualities, greed, corruption, violence lead to war. War in turn creates people who view violence as normal. Those people, viewing violence as normal, in turn enact more violence and more war, and so the cycle continues. But just as people create war, so too do they have the power to end it. People have great capacity for violence, yes, but just because it's there doesn't mean we have to act on it. And that idea is the core of the connection between Madlax and Margaret. The show spends a lot of time building on that mystery. Just how are they connected? How can Margaret sense when it's raining where Madlax is? Why do they both crave pasta? Why do they both remember red shoes? Running parallel to that mystery is the machinations of a character whose actual name I never use because I can't help but call him Vic Mignogna because he's voiced by notable alleged sex pest Vic Mignogna, which is very funny because one of his very first lines is some very creepy sexualizing remark about Madlax who is, and this is true, underage. And here I was going to do a bit where I played the Japanese audio so as to not subject you to that man's voice, while still showing how funny it was that they got a creep to play a creep at a time when his status as a creep was not yet as widely known. Haha, oops, Apollo smacked this show with the gift of prophecy. But then I actually played the Japanese dialogue, and it was just this.
あの娘がマドラックス、美しく、しなやかで、そして強い。
The line is straight up different. Where the Japanese dialogue just says lithe in a normal tone of voice, the line is changed in the English dialogue to supple, with Vic delivering it in his creepy, leering tone. So let's zoom out and lay out the facts as we know them. We've got a normal line of dialogue, we have notable alleged sex pest Vic Mignogna being cast in the role to perform that dialogue, and we have that dialogue being changed into something creepy. I do not know the order of events there. For all I know, the dialogue was always going to be translated as such, but I have to fucking wonder, did someone on the dub team, knowing who had been cast, deliberately change the line to match that casting? Were they trying to tell us something? Did they know? Oh, God, what was I talking about? Oh, right, plot stuff. So anyway, late in the show, Vic Mignogna does some plot stuff to assemble the magic books and brings along Margaret to use them to reveal the big plot door, and goddammit, is this just Kingdom Hearts again? He opens it thinking it's the truth, but Kingdom Hearts is light! Ah! So yeah, he gets disintegrated because he was never real. Way back 12 years ago, he got shot and died, but his strong will combined with the power of the books manifested this new version of him, but now that he knows the truth, it manifests itself into reality, meaning he's dead for real, I think. Pretty sure. Anyway, the point there being, the power of the books can manifest new people when met with a strong will. That's important, remember that. Finally, as the last piece of our puzzle, Madlax and Margaret keep remembering the same night 12 years ago. After the plane crash, Margaret finds her dad in a war-torn town and runs up to him, but he's gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs thanks to the magic plot books making people crazy, and he's ready to shoot her dead, but just before he can, another shot rings out, and he collapses. It's Madlax. She's shot him to save Margaret. Remembering this event causes all sorts of problems between the two in the present, which we're gonna gloss over. What matters for our purposes is the final truth of this memory, the real truth of what happened on that fateful day. Yes, you saw that right. Through clear visual storytelling, we learned that Madlax and Margaret were once one. Margaret sees her dad coming to kill her and has the gun in her hand. She knows she has to kill him to survive, but can't bring herself to do it because she just can't imagine herself as a killer, and who in their right mind would want to hurt family? Those two desires, to survive and to remain her innocent self, come into such great conflict, spark such intense desire, that in her moment of greatest need, the power of the books activates and she splits, her desire to survive manifesting into a whole new person, Madlax, who takes the shot for her, relieving her of that burden. This is the culmination of all the plot points the show has been subtly building throughout its run. The mysterious connection that these two have always shared, what with the rain and the pasta, and the book's ability to manifest new people, as set up by the whole Vic Mignogna plotline. And now, we're left with one final choice. With the truth revealed, will Margaret push it away and continue to live as her naive, innocent self, or embrace Madlax as part of herself? Naturally, she chooses the latter, and much to the Phantom's chagrin, even after accepting the violence of which she is capable, Margaret, and by extension the essence of humanity, remains kind. Madlax split off from her because she didn't want to accept the violence she was forced to enact. But hiding from that part of herself only ever got the people she loved hurt. So, in the end, she chooses to embrace it, accept that it's a part of her, and entirely within her power. In so doing, she's able to become a complete person, someone who controls their violence rather than letting their violence control them. It's a choice that flies completely in the face of Phantom's big evil plans. All the while he's been monologuing about how people are inherently violent and that by unleashing the true essence of humanity, people will revert to their base urges, thus plunging the world into chaos or some shit like that. But simply by making the choice that she does, Margaret proves him dead wrong. The essence of humanity is not violence. It is our ability to recognize our capacity for violence and control it, to enact it when circumstances demand, and search for kinder solutions in all other scenarios. War can change us, yes, but through Margaret's choice, Madlax argues that we can always choose to be better. War and the nature of humanity aren't the only thematic materials Madlax has going on. There's also lots of dad stuff. There's the whole overarching mystery with what happened with Margaret and Madlax's dad, but even before that, there's episodic stories that center dads as the plot's driving element. The very first episode features Madlax failing to rescue a young soldier who himself tried to rescue his father figure from an enemy camp, a man who had already sold him out. Episode 5 sees Madlax escorting a young man through the war zone. His goal is to track down his dad, which is something Madlax can easily relate to. This kid's willing to go to the ends of the earth to find him, and Madlax herself will eventually put her existence on the line in pursuit of the truth of her father. Even part of Vanessa's motivation for getting involved in the plot is to clear her parents' names, mother and father both, as they were shouldered with part of the blame for starting the war. Between all of that, Madlax seems to posit that familial bonds will, like nothing else, drive people to extremes. The kid from episode 1 dies in what he knows from the outset is a futile rescue attempt, just because of that found family connection. The kid from episode 5 quite literally ceases to exist, don't ask, thanks to his quest to find his dad, and Vanessa's quest to absolve her parents culminates in her getting killed. Only Madlax and Margaret survive their mutual dad quest, though not for lack of his trying. But thematically, that plotline was more concerned with self-acceptance, and anyway, it still resulted in a dead dad, so I guess the takeaway there is an over-obsession with family is unhealthy and can get you killed. Only by growing and accepting yourself as your own person can you break the bonds of blood and be free. Obsession's another thing the show likes to interrogate. The two primary antagonists, Vic Mignogna and the Phantom of the Opera, are both obsessed with the truth, and their obsessions drive them to extremes, to killing people and starting a war, and eventually, their obsessions get them both killed. There's another minor antagonist who deals with obsession, but the key difference with her is that she overcomes her obsession, and so is able to survive. Limelda's a sniper in the Goth Sonica army who initially encounters Madlax when she fails to stop her from assassinating the army's top general. From there, hunting down Madlax becomes not just her goal, but her singular obsession. Even when the truth about the war is revealed to her and she goes rogue, killing her former comrades, she still doesn't let up the hunt because it's the only thing left that makes sense to her. With Madlax being the supernatural entity that she is, that hunt was never going to succeed, but because Madlax is the kind soul that she is, she always spares Limelda. Thanks to that, Limelda's obsession is allowed to dissipate and to reform as something new. She's able to learn from Madlax's kindness and take some of it as her own. Obsession turns into respect. A hunter turns into a partner. Getting lost in obsessions can only get you hurt. Learning to let go of them is how one grows. Aside from all of that thematic stuff, Madlax is also generally a pleasant enough show to look at in terms of visual presentation, but I must confess that I find it difficult to assess this show's visual quality given how it was made. See, unlike Noir, Noir, which was shot on film, and so could easily be upscaled to high definition, as evidenced by the nice pretty Blu-ray footage I was able to show you, Madlax was an early digital production. There's no upscaling this, it's stuck at a low DVD resolution. So while there's undoubtedly a lot of the same artistry behind this production, that artistry is less evident simply by virtue of the video quality we have available to us, thus rendering it much harder to judge. I will say that on average, as far as the action scenes go, setting resolution aside, Madlax was on average much less exciting than its predecessor. There was a lot more in the way of effects animation, explosions and such, but character animation during the action scenes was overall less prominent, so it was hard to get as viscerally excited with them. The action scenes have their moments, but those are more to do with their narrative significance rather than any notable animation work. Like in episode 5, it's pretty cool that Madlax can ride up on a motorcycle and shoot a bunch of dudes to save this kid, but the show's relying heavily on the Kuleshov effect, cutting between extreme close-ups of Madlax shooting and goons collapsing to imply the action of her shooting them, rather than animating all of the action within the frame. The scene still works based purely on rule of cool, but as a result of that limited animation, it becomes more notable for what it says about Madlax, that she's willing to put herself in danger for someone she doesn't know simply because she relates to his cause, than for anything the visuals are doing. Alas, those are but the most minor of my complaints. Despite all the juicy thematic material Madlax has going on, a lot of it is let down by its often clumsy handling of dialogue and exposition. I've got two particular examples I want to discuss, the first of which comes relatively early on. In episode 6, Margaret's maid Eleanor has just met with a doctor, consulting with him about Margaret's condition. It's through this exchange that we learn that Margaret's got amnesia as a result of a plane crash 12 years ago, and that she's got a particular attachment to this one weird book, both of which are important plot elements that come up later with all the stuff about the 3 books coming together and Margaret's memories of what her dad did after the crash. So far, so good. But then Eleanor goes outside and runs into their friend Vanessa, and it's this exchange that I take issue with. Eleanor thanks Vanessa for helping to look after Margaret during her hardest days after she got home. Except, that's not what she says. Not yet, at least. Instead, first, she says this.
Miss Vanessa, you took it upon yourself to be her personal tutor. You brought her sophistication and culture and education. You were able to help her with all the things that I could not. Thanks to you, Miss Margaret can go to school just like any normal girl.
This is not how people talk to each other. You don't go up to someone and tell them something they already know about themselves. That would be stupid because, again, they already know that. This is exposition written purely for the audience's benefit. Eleanor is not saying this because Vanessa needs to know this, but because the viewer does. Even if you don't consciously register it, you'll feel it. The artifice of characters saying things to each other that they should not be saying simply because the story needs to convey certain information to the audience that it couldn't figure out how else to say. Once you recognize that artifice, it becomes that much harder to buy into these characters as believable people. To be clear, I'm not asking for realism here. This is a cartoon about magic books brainwashing people and manifesting people out of strong desires. All I'm asking for is verisimilitude, an internal consistency and believability that gives the appearance or feeling of truth. That would entail characters acting and speaking in a way that aligns with what they are established to know and how they are established to act. Saying information out loud that all parties involved already know, just so the audience can hear it, does not fall under that umbrella. There was a better way to go about this, one that wouldn't shatter that appearance and thus maintain that semblance of believability. Instead of Eleanor telling Vanessa that she was Margaret's tutor, what if instead she said something like, "I can't tell you how grateful I am for all that time you spent tutoring Margaret." A statement like that would center Eleanor's gratitude, which is new information for Vanessa, as being the central element of the dialogue, one which requires her to mention the tutoring only in passing for context. By centering new information as the heart of the dialogue, that rewrite would craft a more believable exchange between the two, as we're more likely to buy into Eleanor wanting to convey her thanks instead of repeat information the both of them already know, and still accomplish the same goal of providing that exposition about the tutoring for the viewer. Instead of being centered, it's just mentioned in passing, and so doing feeling more naturalistic. Unfortunately, we don't have that clean, believable dialogue. Instead, we have dialogue that prioritizes exposition over character consistency, thus shattering the verisimilitude of the characters and by proxy, the viewer's investment in them. And in case you're wondering if the Japanese script is any better,
バネッサさんはそんなお嬢様の家庭教師として知識と教養を教えてくださいました。バネッサさんのおかげでお嬢様は その後普通に学校生活を送れるようにまでなられて。
Only a little bit. That sort of clunky exposition pops up frequently enough throughout Madlax that it overall makes for a much less engaging viewing experience, and that's far from the worst of it. This exposition can also be redundant, repeating information that has already been established both verbally and visually, and that repetition has the effect of dragging down the pacing. The cleanest example I could find to illustrate this comes toward the very end of the show, in the ending scenes of episode 25. For context, this is the scene that reveals the final big twist, that Madlax split off from Margaret thanks to the power of the books. To the show's credit, it engaged in clear, effective visual storytelling to convey this information. After already laying a clear narrative precedent for this reveal, with the whole Vic Mignogna subplot, along with the nebulous connections Madlax and Margaret have always shared, we entered this scene perfectly primed to understand this revelation. Thanks to that groundwork, the show is able to visually show the split happening and trust that we'll understand what's going on without being told. That's actually really solid fundamental storytelling, setting up plot beats and paying them off visually without some barely related third party standing on the sidelines expositing about everything that's presently happening.
The part of you that refused to kill your father in self-defense, and the urge that was your will to survive, drew power from that moment and caused you to physically separate into two beings.
Oh god damn it. There goes all that goodwill the show was building. Fumbled it at the finish line. The show went out of its way to plant the seeds for this revelation across its runtime, water them carefully, then let them bloom with a beautifully directed scene that very clearly visually communicated that revelation. And then the fucking Phantom of the Opera waltzes in and tramples all over those flowers by explaining with blunt exposition everything we just saw happen. It's redundant, it's repetitive, we already know this information. We should be moving on, not regurgitating it in a more awkward form. This, more than anything, is what can make Madlax such a frustrating watch. The underlying plot is compelling enough, and when it's allowed to, the visual presentation can be effective in communicating it. But all too often, it's undercut by this need to over-explain everything with clumsy expository dialogue that simply did not need to be there. To be clear, the dialogue isn't always wasted. On occasion, dialogue is effectively used to convey characterization such that you get a strong sense of these characters much faster than you might have otherwise. When characters aren't telling each other things they already know, sometimes they do speak in ways that sound like they're building from an established history, in so doing letting you glimpse that history. One of my favorite bits of dialogue comes in episode 6. Margaret's dozing off in class, then jumps up and yelps thanks to a nightmare about a spider, which, I agree, Margaret, kill it with fire. And we get this great line from her teacher.
Just go back to sleep, Miss Burton.
That is such a good line. On the surface, it's pretty funny, but it also tells the viewer a couple of things without directly stating them. We saw before in episode 2 that Margaret's a slow riser, but her nodding off in class and that line from the teacher illustrate that this is an ongoing problem, dating back at least as long as this teacher has known her, and probably longer, meaning months and maybe years. This also serves to characterize the teacher. He's a minor character, never comes up again, but with just that one line, we get some insight into his personality and insight with Margaret, his exasperation at what she does, and his resigned acceptance. That is clever writing. I just wish that cleverness was more the standard. So often it's not. So often that potential goes wasted by more than just the writing. The other big frustration which exacerbates that wasted potential is a repeat issue. You remember how Noir's biggest problem was its over-reliance on recycled footage? For a while there, it seemed like Madlax had solved that problem and in so doing become the better-paced show, but then episode 11 rolls around and that recap footage crops up again, and from there it gets worse with how much recap footage it employs, with possibly the most egregious single episode being 14, which plays the same recap footage of Madlax freaking out 3 separate times, and if I had to drink for every time the show cut back to this footage of Margaret's dead dad's hand, I would probably be dead from alcohol poisoning. Or more likely just really need to piss, because I don't drink. Those 10 episodes where recap footage was wholly absent were very much appreciated, but despite the late start, the show very much got into using that crutch. And with how frequently it did end up being used at points, I wouldn't be surprised if overall the recap footage accounted for a similar, if not greater amount of runtime than Noir. Because at its worst, it most certainly felt worse than any employment of this tactic in this show's predecessor. My last major gripe about the writing and presentation is something that bothers me perhaps more than it should, given that I've had to deal with much worse by virtue of simply enjoy watching other anime, Madlax overall feels a lot more voyeuristic and objectifying of its female characters in a way Noir simply was not. Don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that nudity and sexuality are invalid forms of artistic expression. Everyone should be free to be as horny in their art as they darn well please. I'm not trying to come off as some puritanical alarmist here, especially after that recent wave of credit card companies engaging in the mass censorship of adult and queer media, which was unambiguously pretty bad. All I'm trying to do here is draw a distinction between the employment and exploration of nudity and sexuality for clear artistic purposes, or fuck it, even just for fun, that's valid, and the exploitation of women's bodies for no clear narrative purpose. In Madlax, the frequency of bathing scenes and other random nudity tip much farther into that latter category than they do the former. They never break a PG-13 limit, true, but they get darn close. Once the camera starts treating the characters as objects to be ogled at, rather than people to be empathized with, the narrative being built loses its emotional foundation. Like, someone please tell me what possible function there could be behind Madlax randomly taking off her dress in the middle of a firefight. It boggles the mind! And on top of that, perhaps more egregiously, numerous male characters, major and minor, will halt everything to remark on the female characters, either for simply being women.
It's just that you're a girl.
Or to salivate over their looks, and it always feels just a little gross.
Damn. If all the officers in the elite guard look like that, I'd be court-martialed.
A beautiful young lady like you. That's kind of hard to believe.
How do you do? What a cute young lady.
You're looking as beautiful as ever.
When it happens repeatedly, the effects compound into distinct discomfort. If the populace of this world is constantly demeaning the presence of the main characters we're following, it comes across as if the show itself can't commit to them being fully independent people. Like it doesn't respect them. Not fully. This is made all the more prominent by the fact that in Noir, this just wasn't an issue. Miriel and Kirika's gender would occasionally be remarked upon, but never more than in passing, and Noir certainly didn't make a habit of having characters talk like, damn, that chick's smoking hot. No, they were too busy getting shot for that, and they're still getting shot at here, so when they interrupt that to make leering remarks about women, it breaks the world's verisimilitude and gives the impression that the characters are not respected by the narrative. And if the narrative doesn't respect them, why should we? Granted, in a lot of other avenues, this show does present these characters as nuanced, complicated people. It's just a shame it has to be bogged down by this crass objectification that does not in any way serve the narrative. What I'm saying is this show didn't drink a full cup of its prescribed respect women juice. It only drank like half a cup. Okay, if that shit don't bother you, then fine, power to you, but it was there and it bothered me and this is my video, damn it, you cannot censor me! I will speak the truth! Anyway, I know I've been quite down on this show for a hot minute now, but I want to clarify that it does have a lot of material worth engaging with. Honestly, one could reasonably argue that this show is the most thematically dense of the lot. It's got a whole lot of ideas, and some of the spaghetti it throws at the walls even manages to stick. At its best, it's a very weird and very compelling supernatural thriller with an optimistic outlook that posits that people can choose to be better in the face of absolute horror. Unfortunately, much of it is bogged down by some clunky writing and excessive dialogue, and while the show's generally creative in its visual presentation, it's nowhere near as clean as its predecessor. It's an interesting show, but one that's difficult to recommend. One thing I will say though, clunky as the dialogue can be, right at the end, we got some pitch-perfect line delivery by the dub actors. Keeping in mind that this show is otherwise absent of coarse language, in the very last episode when the Phantom of the Opera realizes that all his evil plans are crumbling around him and it's all Margaret's fault, he shouts at her, "You bitch!" To which Margaret responds,
I'm a bad little girl.
10 out of 10, no notes.
Got any last words? Say 'em.
El Cazador de la Bruja follows Nadia, a young bounty hunter who's tasked with guarding Ellis, an amnesiac fugitive accused of murdering her father figure. What at first seems like a simple bodyguarding job turns complicated when it turns out Ellis has witch powers she can't control and an overriding desire to go south to learn the truth about herself. And so, with trigger-happy bounty hunters on their tail and other secret schemers plotting against them, Nadia and Ellis set out together on a mission to survive and uncover the secrets surrounding Ellis. As before, we've got Mashimo and Kitayama in the director and producer chairs respectively. Joining them for writing duties for this last adventure is Kenichi Kanemaki, whose most notable screenwriting credits prior to this include the Record of Lodoss War OVA, more stuff that's basically porn, and Yu-Gi-Oh! After he would go on to write a few episodes for Sayonara Zetsubo Sensei, which I hear is excellent, and that's all that's really notable here. So here's a guy who knows his way around a fantastical adventure, which is just fine, because while the bulk of El Cazador is roughly modern, it does delve into the bizarre. Let's get into it. El Cazador is the easiest of these shows to recommend because right out of the gate, it's just a rollicking good time. The first episode immediately hits you with fun, expressive characters, the main duo Nadia and Ellis, who quickly establish an endlessly amusing rapport, and it's the characterization and dynamic of these two, both individually and as partners, that make this show an effortlessly enjoyable watch, even in spite of its more frustrating elements. So let's first talk about how this show accomplishes that. Our introduction to Nadia sees her leaning over a table, groaning, not even looking as she tries to grab a phone the waiter is handing her, before perking up at hearing the voice at the other end. Hard cut to her failing to hitchhike and kicking the ground in frustration with this highly exaggerated pose. These two brief scenes alone are great visual storytelling, already establishing a few things. It sets this show's more loose, playful tone with Nadia's hyperbolic attitude. That one exaggerated pose sets her up as an expressive character before we even see her face. And the background art, with its cacti mountains and wide fields, establishes the pseudo-Western Latin American setting. 2 scenes, less than a minute in total, and we've already got a lot to go on. Fun tone, expressive characters, and the setting. And we've still got a whole lot of episode to go. After that, we follow Ellis for a bit. She does a grocery run and serves lunch to an old woman she's staying with, setting a baseline of kindness for her. Then, she tries to do some card tricks in the street, and with this one scene, we get a much clearer idea of who she is. The townspeople are impressed with her, itself foreshadowing that she has some actual magical talents, but it's what she says right after she's done that's really informative. She sets down a collection box and says,
"Give me your money now."
That is so good, and it serves a couple of purposes. On the face of it, it's downright comedic, further establishing the fun tone this series aims to maintain for most of its runtime. On top of that, it provides our first characterization of Ellis as sort of naive, innocent, even optimistic. She knows how this is supposed to work, perform an impressive trick, get money for it. But she doesn't understand why simply saying, "Give me your money," doesn't do the trick. People don't just want to be entertained, they want to be respected. If she'd framed it as a polite request, or heck even told a sob story about how she needs the money for her poor grandmother, she might have swayed a few hearts, but that's not who she is. Ellis is straightforward to a fault, expecting things to happen like they're supposed to. In other words, she lacks social graces. What's also great about this, though, is that Ellis isn't sad or torn up over her failure. In fact, she seems rather unfazed. She could have easily gotten upset at the audience for being stingy, but she didn't. Rather, she just moved on, started packing up her things. Why is that? We can intuit that, despite lacking in those social graces, Ellis is fundamentally kind. She's not out to blame anyone for her failures. She's content to just move on, try again another day. And just look at that. Strong characterization for Ellis and setting the show's more comedic tone, all done with just a single line of dialogue. Now that is economic storytelling. And we're not even done with this scene, because just as Ellis starts to pack up, Nadia walks up. Here we get the scene that sets the baseline for their dynamic going forward. Nadia tosses a couple of coins into the box, maybe feeling sorry for Ellis, maybe feeling kind, and doesn't pull her punch when she says,
"For a street performer, you don't play to the crowd so good."
Ellis, though, instead of being offended by the remark, looks at the 2 coins disappointed and says,
"So that's all? Can't even buy bread.
That's an incredible exchange which carries on and solidifies the comedic tone, provides further characterization for both Nadia and Ellis, and sets up their dynamic going forward. What does it say about Nadia that instead of consoling Ellis or trying to downplay her performance, she calls it as she sees it? That tells us she's a straight shooter, blunt and to the point. That's not to say that she's inconsiderate, just that she doesn't see the use in bullshitting. You can't learn from your mistakes if you pretend you never made any. This blunt honesty is thus us how Nadia shows respect. So, from just one line of dialogue, we've already got a much stronger sense of who Nadia is. The same can be said for Ellis. She doesn't take offense at the blunt assessment. Instead, she wears her heart on her sleeve, showing her disappointment that her pay is so low. This reinforces what we've already learned about her, that she lacks social graces. Most people would thank someone for giving them money, rather than complain that it wasn't enough. But again, Ellis lacks social graces, so instead of faking a smile, she says what she thinks with no filter. She's honest to a fault. And part of that's born from youthful naivete, yes, from simply not having a lot of experience with the world. If she was more mindful of how her words might make her appear as childish and ungrateful, she might have simply smiled and said thanks. But also, part of it is, in parallel to Nadia, a penchant for being a straight shooter. She, too, doesn't see the use in faking things, so she simply says how she feels, consequences be damned. And let's not forget that this brief exchange also gets the ball rolling on their playful dynamic. It's just the first of many instances of banter between them, with Ellis saying something that is somehow both perfectly logical and fitting with her character, and still unexpected based on common sense or social norms. And Nadia acting as the straight man, getting flummoxed or otherwise amused by Ellis being Ellis.
You're not even gonna thank me?
Thank you. What for?
Well, because...
Oh well.
Hang on, that's my line.
This playful dynamic of theirs never gets old. Indeed, watching them bounce off of each other like this is not only one of the show's primary appeals, but it also gets to the heart of the narrative, the emotional core that keeps you invested throughout. Nadia and Ellis's growing bond. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For the moment, what I hope I've illustrated is that right out of the gate, El Cazador was able to strongly characterize its leads through clever dialogue, and this quick characterization is vital to the show as it keeps the pacing snappy and gets us invested early, such that by the time the action kicks in, we're strapped in for the long haul. But dialogue isn't the only avenue of characterization this show engages in. It does a lot with the character's physicality, too, from dynamic expressions to full-body animation. I mean, just look at Nadia's face when she says, "Hang on, that's my line." It's brief, but look at those squinted eyes, those upturned eyebrows, that cheeky smile. What does that one expression say about her? She's befuddled, not annoyed, but certainly thrown off her game. She who came into this interaction so confident. She's just gotta take a second to process things, that's all. Instead of brushing off the unexpected, Nadia's the kind of person who takes the time to think things through. Therefore, this one interaction, hell, this one facial expression, amusing as it seems on the surface, is actually setting the baseline for their partnership going forward. Nadia may be the more outwardly expressive of the two, but she's also the more considerate. When things are at their hairiest, she's going to be the one to stop and plan, to figure out what to do next. There's also this great expression from Nadia a little bit later when Ellis just leaps a fence and all she can do is look on in shock. This penchant for expressiveness illustrates the dynamism of Nadia's character. She's a competent gunslinger, yes, but she's also a colorful personality who wears her heart on her sleeve.
Wasn't really going for laughs.
Ah, but you do elicit them, Nadia, and all of that, your expressiveness, your loud personality, combine to make you such a fun protagonist, easy to get emotionally invested in. And this show's use of expressions and animation to characterize its cast extends beyond Nadia. There's some important stuff going on for Ellis, too. It wouldn't be fair to call her expressionless, as she often dons a faint, easy smile and seems generally at ease. But in comparison to Nadia, she's a lot more reserved and soft-spoken, which only makes her moments of more obvious expressiveness that much more impactful. Sticking with the first episode, let's take a look at two moments in particular. During the first shootout, Nadia jumps in to bodily protect Ellis, and a bullet grazes her arm, the sight of which causes Ellis to gasp. This is the first real strong emotion we've seen from her. Those wide eyes and dropped jaw reflecting surprise and pain at someone else getting hurt because of her. What does it say about her that what hurts her the most is someone else getting hurt in her place? Put a pin in that as we skip ahead to later in the episode. The two are camped out on a rooftop waiting for trouble to blow over, and Ellis gets fixated on Nadia's wound. Nadia insists it's nothing, but Ellis pokes it and...
Big liar.
So we've got some more great expressiveness from Nadia there, put a pin in Ellis's, but what's most important here is that Ellis then starts to bandage Nadia's wound, and right after she agrees to not return to the old woman she's staying with, which would put her at risk. Let's bring it all together. The initial reaction to Nadia getting shot, that shock on a previously stoic face, shows that she can't stand it when other people get hurt because of her. That's the one thing in life that bothers her above all else. That characterization is reinforced by this second expression expression. She's amused by Nadie's bravado, yes, establishing the ease at which they're going to get along, but more importantly, look where her gaze is fixated, on the blood that now stains her finger. This is a complicated expression, the amused smile hiding the pain reflected by those scrunched eyebrows. Looking at someone else hurting because of her hurts her. This tendency for empathy is then finally solidified through her subsequent action and dialogue. The action of bandaging the wound without being asked, and the dialogue of agreeing to keep away from someone else she cares about to protect her. Thanks to all of that, we come away from this episode with an understanding of Ellis as someone who puts the well-being of others above herself, as someone for whom watching those she cares about get hurt is the worst thing imaginable, and much of that was accomplished just through visuals, her expressions, and her actions. We're just about 2,000 words into this section, and we haven't even got past the first episode, so we're gonna move on in a second. What I hope all of this has illustrated so far is that El Cazador engages in some supremely effective economical storytelling right out of the gate. It takes full advantage of its medium, using clever dialogue and expressive animation to characterize its leads, making this narrative the most instantly engaging of the trilogy. So now let's try to draw a straight line out and see how this show carries forward the characterization of its leads and their bond. El Cazador, even more so than Noir, completely hinges on the growing bond between its two leads. They're a great comedic duo. They help each other grow, and ultimately, the overarching conflict is resolved because of their strengthened bond, because of their love for each other. Let's take those points one at a time. I'm not going to belabor the first of these points terribly much, them being a comedic duo, as we've already spent a decent chunk of time analyzing just one humorous interaction of theirs. Suffice to say that their playful banter is a constant throughout the show, and every recurrence thereof serves to reinforce their growing bond and to keep us amused and engaged. After all, it's much easier to like a character when they can get you to chuckle, right?
You've become so well-mannered.
I am well-mannered.
You're on my foot.
Oh, I am.
No apology?
What for?
I take back what I just said.
On that second point, Nadia and Ellis are both instrumental in each other's growth as characters. By the end of the show, they're both inarguably more mature people, while still being recognizably themselves. Let's focus on Nadia first. Nadia enters the narrative as a competent, if somewhat carefree, bounty hunter. But with that competence comes dashes of arrogance. When they first set out together, as amused as Nadia sometimes is by Ellis's antics, she also finds herself on occasion irritated by her, like here in episode 4, where Nadia displays clear annoyance at Ellis for nodding off during a shootout. Look at that face, saying without words, "God damn it, take this seriously." At first, Ellis is not someone to be trusted. She's a job, someone to be protected, and nothing more. Running concurrent to all of this is an underlying dissatisfaction with her own life. Nadia's good at what she does, yes, but she wants more. As she tells the fortune teller in the first episode, after said fortune teller warns her of upcoming dangers,
I just want to find happiness.
But what does that happiness entail? We get hints of that in the very next episode. The end of that episode sees Nadia reuniting an estranged daughter and mother, and taking the blame for some of the mother's actions so the daughter won't run off again, even as that makes the daughter hate her, despite how well they were just getting along. Just before they drive off, she tells the mother,
Remember, you two are the only family you've got.
And at the end, alone on the road with Ellis, she cries. This shows that she puts great value in family, and hints that what she may be missing in her life, what she may need, is something like that. I wonder where she might find it. So we've got her wants for happiness and family, but those wants clash with her initial treatment of Ellis as some helpless brat for whom she needs to do everything. The most obvious small-scale example of this occurs in episode 18, where some careless acts from Nadia, accidentally smashing Ellis's novelty keychain and ribbing her for her poor flute-playing skills.
You suck.
Get Ellis really pissed off at her for the first time. So they spend some time apart, and Nadia has to put some hard thought into just what she was doing wrong. With some advice from a friend, she realizes that she needs to stop taking Ellis for granted. She needs to understand that Ellis has a lot more going on than that image Nadia has constructed of her. She needs to consider and embrace the whole person. Coming to that determination is one of the first steps in Nadia realizing just how much she cares for Ellis. And indeed, when she finds Ellis at the end of the episode after she thought she'd disappeared, she runs in for a fierce hug, apologizing for how she treated her. Simply by being with Ellis, Nadia is thus pushed into being a kinder, more empathetic person. All of this comes to a head in the next to last episode, basically the finale. The last episode serves as an epilogue, and we'll circle back to that. So in this finale, a bunch of magic plot stuff is happening, the details of which we don't need to get into, but what it boils down to is this. In order to stop the big bad from taking control of Ellis and getting a whole bunch of magic power for himself, Ellis asks Nadia to shoot her dead. The Nadia at the start of the show would never have done this. Even the Nadia from the middle of the show, who abandoned her initial contract to guard Ellis in order to stay with Ellis and protect her from Nadia's initial employer, would not have done that. But this is a Nadia who's grown past her initial treatment of Ellis as someone to be babied. Now, she trusts Ellis as a partner. She loves her. So, she does as Ellis asks, foiling the big bad's plans and dying herself in the process. And ultimately, her trust is rewarded when an ally of theirs comes into her own witch powers and revives Ellis, who in turn revives Nadia. This whole show, Nadia has been saving Ellis. Now, the roles are reversed. Now, Ellis saves Nadia, and as the icing on the cake, when they chase down the big bad, for the first time, Nadia lets Ellis hold her gun, and Ellis says Nadia's catchphrase as she pulls the trigger and shoots the big bad dead.
Got any last words? Say 'em.
This image of them standing together says it all. Now, after everything, they've come together as inseparable partners, their bond unbreakable. In sum, Nadia's arc fulfills that classic pole of wants versus needs. She wants happiness, she wants a family, but she needs to realize that Ellis is more than a job. She's an equal, a partner to be trusted and loved. And once Nadia realizes that, she also realizes that all along she's had that family she's been searching for, and in so doing finds her happiness. Fulfilling her need was thus how she found her want. Overall then, forming her bond with Ellis was what allowed Nadia to grow into a kinder, more empathetic person. And that bond goes both ways, because it also enables Ellis to grow over the course of the show. Her arc can best be summarized as learning to trust and not let fear control her. As though you wouldn't think it by just looking at her, she is very much motivated by fear. Fear of pain brought on by loss, fear of losing those closest to her, or of those she cares about getting hurt because of her. This fear was instilled in her early on, before the show even got started. Episode 14 shows us how she got there. It's a flashback episode detailing her early childhood, showing how she was raised by a physicist who was at first cold to her, treating her as nothing more than an experiment. But then they spend a full decade together, and you can't spend that long caring for someone and not develop some affection. By the end of the episode, they formed a strong father-daughter bond, and just as they plan to run away from the experiments she's been a part of, the physician gets killed, and Ellis blames herself, with her memory corrupted. For all she knows, she did the deed herself. A possibility made all too real by the fact that there's a bounty on her head for that killing. So we return to the choice she made in the first episode and why she made it. When she realizes that bounty hunters are after her and that people around her will naturally be in danger, she chooses to leave behind the old woman she was staying with and seemingly taking care of, because she can't stand the thought of someone else dying for or because of her. Tragically, the old woman is killed anyway in a bid to lure Ellis out of hiding, and that only serves to harden her resolve. No one else can get hurt because of her. So she sets out with Nadia with the goal in mind to recover her memories and learn the truth about herself. If she can do that, just maybe, she can learn to control her powers. And then, no one she cares about will ever get hurt again, either for or because of her. So there we have her primary want, to learn about herself and eliminate pain and loss from her life. But that want becomes so overriding that it itself starts to hurt her, driving a wedge into her relationship with Nadia. At first, this manifests in petty ways, like in episode 19, where she gets jealous when Nadia spends time with someone else whom a third party very falsely insinuated she had a relationship with. There, that fear of pain and loss drives her to possessiveness, to seeing threats where there are none and so acting out. That's resolved easily enough when Nadia demonstrates that Ellis will always be the most important person to her by rescuing her from a kidnapping attempt.
You came for me.
Duh. Of course I did.
As comforted as Ellis is in that moment, it's still significant that those feelings manifested at all. It shows a subtle darkness growing in Ellis, a darkness that only festers. In episode 23, after Nadia got hurt in the previous episode following some magic shenanigans, Ellis confesses that she hates her powers, would be rid of them if she could.
Because it hurts the people I care about.
And as a direct result of that, soon after, she runs away from Nadia. She's grown to care about her too much. The last person she loved died because of her, and she's just seen evidence that that can easily happen again, so she won't let it. But by making that choice to abandon Nadia, she inadvertently ends up causing further conflict, with her running into the big bad's main henchman and Nadia having to bail her out. Nadia was hurt by Ellis running off on her like that, but she still chose to stay with Ellis anyway. Now, Ellis needs to do the same. Her wants almost drove them apart, almost drove Ellis away from the thing that mattered most to her. What she needs, instead, is to accept that pain and hardship are inevitable. She can't run away from that. She has to face it head on. Only once she accepts the possibility of pain can she begin to enjoy the fruits of love.
I'll be by your side no matter what happens, and I will never let you suffer alone. Okay, partner?
Yes, sir.
So, by fully accepting Nadia as her partner, Ellis confronts and moves past her fear. Once it is gone, only she remains. It's only once she's fulfilled that need that she's finally able to pursue and attain her want, to learn the truth of her past and control her powers. And it was all only possible thanks to her relationship with Nadia, pushing her to be brave, pushing her to dare to love once more. But the encapsulation of all of that isn't even in that episode, or indeed in the finale, though her reviving Nadia is certainly part of it. A clear illustration of that control she's been searching for the whole show. No, the final bow on Ellis's development comes at the very end, in the epilogue episode. In this episode, Ellis and Nadia have settled down for a quiet life with normal, boring jobs. An earlier episode, 17, showed Nadia walking Ellis through a day in the life of a bounty hunter, from selecting a target to staking them out and chasing them down, and by the end, with Ellis's clear discomfort at the whole affair, Nadia agrees to never go out on a bounty hunting job again. But from what we've learned about Ellis, we can intuit that Ellis's discomfort wasn't about any moral hangups with the job. Rather, all she cared about was Nadia's safety. She was too scared that her trusted partner would get hurt. But now, at the end, she's fulfilled her need to move past that fear. Now, she would not request the same of Nadia again. And so, months into their peaceful life, Ellis notices Nadia's restlessness and asks if she'd rather be out on the road again. At first, Nadia's insistent that she's content with what they've got, but Ellis sees through that as the white lie it is. Nadia was only putting up with it because she thought it was the life Ellis needed, but it wasn't. What Ellis needs is simply to be with the partner she loves, and she wants her partner to be happy.
Because I love that sparkle in her eye. Love.
The Ellis at the start of the show could never have made that decision. She had a hard enough time understanding other people, of thinking from another's point of view, and even her relationships with those she cared about carried an undercurrent of fear. But she's learned to let go of fear, and thanks to being with Nadia, she's learned to put herself in another's shoes, see things from another's perspective. And so, now she can make the choice to make another happy. A choice that also, happily, makes her happy. It's a bit of a role reversal. Now, Ellis takes charge in her and Nadia setting out on an adventure, and with that, they've finally grown into true, equal partners.
So, where are we heading, partner?
Lirio, duh. Let's go and see her.
Yes, sir!
So there we have it. The show's primary appeals are in its leads and their bond. They are dynamic characters with fun banter who help each other grow, and their love gives the show a solid emotional core. The narrative stakes are given real weight because the show goes the extra mile to make you care about its cast, both as individuals and as partners. And now we've spent far longer talking about just the two of them than I anticipated, so we're going to do a lightning round-ish, zipping through the other noteworthy things in the show, both the good and the bad. First, on the good, El Cazador's got some other thematic stuff going on besides Ellis's Ellis's arc of learning to live with pain and Nadia's of learning to trust. There's also, most notably, an undercurrent of exploring power. The thesis here isn't that classic adage of power corrupts, but rather Robert A. Caro's revised notion that power reveals. See Lindsay Ellis's second Game of Thrones video for more on that. This is best illustrated in the difference in how power is wielded by Ellis and the show's main antagonist, Rosenberg. Rosenberg covets the witch's powers. He seeks them for his own ends, and in that pursuit, he leverages no end of political and economic power, in so doing torturing a victim of the experiments he funded, killing Ellis's dad, and all in all being a creep. Rosenberg is thus a man with soft power who uses his power for narrow-minded, self-centered pursuits, and he wants more power to continue his malevolent designs. In other words, a man with power uses it for evil and seeks more power to commit further evil. It's worth noting, though, that Rosenberg's soft power pales in comparison to Ellis's tangible magic powers. He covets those powers, but attaining them wouldn't change him. He would simply continue doing the evil he's always been doing. Ellis, though, has had these powers her whole life, and what does she do with them? Pointedly, not evil. All she ever uses them for is to protect the people she cares about, because of course she does. Naive though she is, Ellis is a kind person. Power doesn't change that. That's what's meant by the phrase power reveals. What you do with it shows who you really are. If you get it and use it to enact evil, self-centered agendas, that reveals you as an egotistical asswipe, as is the case with Rosenberg. If you have power and use it solely to help people, that reveals you to be a fundamentally good person, as is the case with Ellis. So, that's neat. Another neat thing is the show's action animation. It never reaches Noir's heights, but I think it's an overall step up from Madlax. I like these bits in episode 19, for example, where Nadia literally leaps into action the instant she realizes Ellis is in trouble. The animation itself is fluid, and the immediacy itself is informative of Nadia's character, how quick on her feet she is, and how Ellis is always her top priority. The most notable bits of animation, though, come courtesy of the show's secondary antagonist, L.A., who is an absolute crazy person, and so, appropriately, in animation he is portrayed as an absolute fucking Looney Tune. Now on to the bad. I do have a few minor gripes. For one, there's a lot of narration from a secondary character, Blue Eyes, which at the best of times is just sort of there, and at the worst can get kind of redundant a la Madlax repeating out loud what we already know. Though to be clear, I never got as annoyed by it here. There's also that classic B-train over-reliance on recap footage, though I would argue this offense is least egregious in this show out of the three, as it never happened more than once, maybe twice, within an episode. Uses thereof tended to be spaced out between episodes, and said uses were always brief. The male gazy shit from Madlax is still here, though not as frequent, and thankfully almost completely absent in dialogue. It's just the visuals you have to worry about, and that only a handful of times. Finally, and this is probably the most uncomfortable bit of the whole thing, there are two characters who are named in the credits simply as transvestites, whose characterization is seemingly just a list of stereotypes. These characters are exclusively antagonistic toward the main duo, and they are met and portrayed with exactly zero empathy. So, you know, not exactly positive rep there. I don't know, maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's more nuance or empathy on display that I just missed. Believe you me, I would love to be wrong about this. Prove me wrong in the comments if you can. But from what I could tell, this show created trans characters just to be one-note fill-ins, which is unfortunate. Thankfully, they are bit players, only appearing in 4 of the 26 episodes, but still, for what they were, they could have been done better. But with those few negatives out of the way, let me reiterate that El Cazador de la Bruja is the most fun of these 3 shows, simply for how strongly it characterizes its 2 leads. That element alone makes this show worth watching, and make no mistake, you should. On top of its dynamic leads, it's got some compelling visuals, both in action and in storytelling, and a strong emotional core to keep you invested throughout. And with that, congratulations, B-Train. You ended your trilogy on a high note. So now that we've discussed each of these shows on their own terms, now we must consider what makes them a trilogy. What parallels can we draw between them beyond the obvious angle of them all featuring women with weapons? Do they, in fact, constitute a trilogy, or do we just say that because of that common angle? While the 3 shows share no obvious continuity, aside from a Noir Easter egg in El Cazador, I think there's enough narrative and thematic parallels that all 3 shows can be viewed as at least in conversation with one another. First, one common narrative trope is amnesia and the accompanying search for truth about the self, and about your dead dad. All 3 shows do this. Kirika in Noir wakes up with no memories, and she and Muriel both have to learn the truth about how Muriel's parents were killed. Both Madlax and Margaret want to learn the truth about how their dad got killed, and Ellis, too, has her memories jumbled up and has to learn the truth about how her dad got killed. Learning the truth causes hardships for the main characters of Noir and Madlax, but ultimately, in all 3 shows, learning the truth was a key step on the journey to self-actualization. So, one common thematic thread between all 3 shows is that the truth will set you free. Next, both Noir and Madlax, and to a lesser extent El Cazador, are concerned with the idea of taking on another sin. In Noir, the historical titular assassin duo was founded with the purpose of taking on humanity's sins unto themselves, in so doing sheltering the innocent, and indeed, within our own Noir, Muriel and Kirika have to accept each other's sins in order to create the strongest version of their partnership. In Madlax herself was created so that Margaret didn't have to live with the sin of killing her own dad, and it was only by accepting that part of herself that she was able to grow into a more complete person. With El Cazador, it's a bit of a stretch, but you could say that Ellis learning to accept Nadier's more sinful side, the bounty hunting, that is part of what enables them to form so strong a partnership. So overall, these shows want you to recognize that people have the potential to sin, to do great harm, but hiding from that potential is no way to deal with it. Instead, one must recognize that potential within themselves and others. Only by doing that can one truly live with it, and perhaps learn how to truly counteract it. There's also some lesser parallels throughout. Margaret and Ellis are both sleepyheads, Kirika and Margaret both suffer from some light brainwashing at the hands of the bad guys, but I feel like there's something bigger, something I'm missing, something that's been prevalent this whole time, but for whatever reason, I just haven't articulated fully yet. Oh right, it's Yuki Kajiura! Each of these shows had a rotating production staff, from writers to animators, but aside from Mashimo always sitting in the director's chair and Kitayama in the producers, the one constant throughout all 3 of these shows is that their scores were composed by the legendary Yuki Kajiura. Today, she's perhaps best known for her work on the masterful Madoka Magica soundtrack. She's also done work on the Fate franchise and Demon Slayer, but it was with B-Train that she started to build her portfolio in the anime sphere. After working with her on the anime adaptation of the Eat Man manga, I assumed that Mashimo was impressed enough with her work to recruit her to come compose for his shows at B-Train, and thank goodness that happened, because not only did she stick with the studio all the way through El Cazador, giving each show she worked on a unique auditory identity, but who knows where her career would have gone if she didn't have B-Train to help build it. Can you imagine a world where Madoka doesn't have its iconic Kajiura soundtrack? I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in that world. But as for her soundtracks for the Girls with Guns shows, yeah, they slap. In Noir and Madlax in particular, they do a lot of heavy lifting to lend atmosphere and intrigue to scenes that would otherwise read as simply slow. Noir's got a lot of great moody tracks. Madlax in particular hosts what is likely Kajiura's most famous composition outside of Madoka. That track alone is a real hype machine, instantly injecting incitement into the scene every time it starts to play. And of course, her El Cazador soundtrack features heavy use of harmonica and strings to evoke a Western feel. Each of her soundtracks, without exception, elevate their respective shows, and without her, these anime would be far less engaging than they wound up. Okay. Yes, there is one last parallel you might have picked up on and or been waiting for me to mention. These shows are, subtextually, and maybe a little bit more than subtextually, kinda gay? I mean, Wikipedia says it, so it has to be true, right? I already spent a good deal of time belaboring the relationships between Muriel and Kirika and Nadia and Ellis in their respective segments, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much here, but suffice to say that both Noir and El Cazador hinge on the relationship between their leads, especially El Cazador. To be clear, you shouldn't go into these shows looking for unambiguous queer rep. In the case of Noir, while it does have 2 separate scenes of same-sex kisses, both are of dubious consent from a villain to one of the main characters, which is certainly a choice. And while Kirika's letter to Muriel can certainly be read as romantic, the two never display much in the way of physical affection and certainly nothing in the way of verbal affection. So while I would argue the two do love each other, whether that love is romantic or platonic or sisterly or what have you, the actual text of the show is never going to provide clear answers. It's all left to the nebulous realm of subtext. I will say, though, the subtext is loud enough that even the dub cast picked up on it. In the bonus features of the Noir home video release, there's this sock puppet show. Okay, sorry, tangent time! The home video releases for Noir contain, at least my Blu-ray set does, this parody sock puppet show featuring the dub cast performing a comedy skit as sock puppet versions of their characters where they set out on an assignment to kill prolific anime dub actor Chris Patton. I don't know why this exists or why it was included, but for just how baffling it was, I honestly found it so funny.
I just like killing things.
Oh, well in that case, you might be interested in this.
And I bring all this up because one of the bits in this skit is this.
Let's go home and make tea instead.
Yes, and sleep in the same bed. Not that we're implying anything by that.
No, of course not, Snugglebums.
So yeah, even they thought Muriel and Kirika were a little not quite straight. And yes, that was the thinnest excuse in the world to bring up the sock puppet show, but you have to understand, I couldn't keep that knowledge for myself. Anyway, back on topic of these characters being ambiguously gay. Looking at Nadia and Ellis, while their partnership is never 100% completely unambiguously stated to be a romantic one, with all the affection they display for one another, you cannot convince me that their bond is anything but. And if you try, you are boring and we cannot be friends.
Do we look married?
What?
Like we're a happy couple.
Couples are usually a man and a woman.
So what?
X gon' give it to you. Fuck, wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you.
They share plenty of physical affection, and for God's sake, Ellis even says,
I love you, Nadia.
I mean, that's pretty damn clear. Just because they never kiss or explicitly state that they're dating doesn't make their bond any less romantic. They are partners, and that is that. You may be wondering, though, what about Madlax? If this is supposed to be a common theme among all 3 shows, why'd you skip that one, Tyranno? Well, honestly, I don't think Madlax really has anything noteworthy in that department. Like, if you try really hard, you can read queerness into a couple of relationships there, but you could do that with a lot of things, and I just don't think there's anything actually supported by the text. But hey, this isn't my area of expertise. Maybe I missed something. So to make up for my limitations, I hired a team of crack scientists to go through Madlax with a fine-tooth comb and see if they could pick out on any queer subtext. Let's call them up now, see what they've got for us. Hey Tuvok, found anything?
We ain't found shit.
Well, there you go. This shit ain't gay. To be clear, you shouldn't be going into these shows if you're looking for something more than subtext. The main appeals of these shows, as we've discussed in great detail, are found elsewhere. With the exception of El Cazador, if you go into these shows looking for unambiguous Yuri, you're gonna be disappointed, especially with Madlax. So don't do that, and instead focus on their more explicit strengths, their characterization, their atmosphere, their action, and their surprising thematic depth. So that's B-Train's Girls with Guns trilogy. All unique shows, all compelling in their own right, and while they have no narrative continuity, it now falls on us to consider. Do they function as a trilogy, as a complete body of work? They've certainly got enough narrative and thematic parallels to make that argument. All 3 are concerned with uncovering hidden truths, both about one's circumstances and self. The uncovering of these truths is always tied directly into the protagonist's personal growths. In accepting the truth, one also has to accept sin. Noir is about accepting another's sins, Madlax is about accepting one's own, and El Cazador is about both one's own and another's. In that, we can see a minor thematic progression, an escalation of the burden one has to accept before achieving self-actualization. But in the end, all of the characters get there. By enduring incredible hardships and accepting terrible truths, they're able to come out the other end stronger. Together, these shows show that the truth will always set you free. But even if these shows didn't function as a thematic trilogy, they're still all worth checking out on their own terms. Noir's vibes are immaculate. Few shows can set a mood like it can, and its action scenes are some of the coolest around. Madlax has a lot of intriguing plotting and a killer soundtrack, and El Cazador is just a classic adventure romp with easily lovable protagonists. Noir is a classic I would recommend everyone check out to at least see if you can vibe with its mood. El Cazador is easy to recommend if you're looking for a fun time, and even Madlax never gets boring with all of its moving pieces. Rough as they all can be, each brings something unique to the table that you're just not going to find elsewhere in the anime sphere. So, yes, for all of the reasons discussed so far and more, each of these shows is worth checking out. And regardless of their quality, they might be worth remembering simply for the fact that these 3 shows may be B-Train's legacy. Noir was the first original production the studio worked on, El Cazador the last. With Koichi Mashimo's retirement in 2012, B-Train closed its doors, its last works after El Cazador being a handful of adaptations. In the end, did Mashimo accomplish his goal of making B-Train into a hospital for anime workers? I think he did. The creators he collaborated with, such as Kajiura, Kuroda, Kanemaki, and countless animators all went on to have prolific careers, many of whom are still active today. And as part of Mashimo's incubation process, they all ended up producing eclectic, often bizarre, yet wholly original works. The legacy of Mashimo and B-Train thus lives on both in the artists they helped elevate and the work they together produced. A legacy perfectly encapsulated by 3 shows about girls with guns. That is a surprisingly difficult line. Ribbing her for her poor flute playing skills. What?